The major event in the evolution of vertebrates was the transition from living on living in the water to living on land. The first vertebrates to have limbs and that were able to move on land date back to around 365 million years ago. So these are called tetrapods. These are vertebrate animals with four limbs. The transition from water to land occurred once in the evolution of vertebrates. So this gave rise to three major lineages: the reptiles, mammals, and amphibians. A good example of this transition, or an animal that you can look at to see how this transition occurred, is the lungfish, because the lungfishes are the closest living relatives to tetrapods. And lungfishes, these fish, they inhabit shallow, oxygen-poor water, so they take in oxygen from the air into their lungs, and this supplements the oxygen that they get from their gills. You can see that lungfishes have a series of adaptations for surviving on land for short periods of time, and they can even withstand dry periods by burrowing. You can also see fossils that provide strong links between the limbs of the ancestors of today's lungfishes and the earliest land-dwelling vertebrates. And there's several regulatory proteins that are involved in the development of fish fins and also mammal limbs. So these regulatory proteins are um, considered to be homologous. So these are uh, proteins that are inherited from a common ancestor. The proteins produced by several different Hox genes are found at the same times during development and the same locations in fins and limbs. So once the tetrapod limb evolved through adaptive radiation, this resulted in diverse structures that are used for several types of locomotion, like gliding, crawling, swimming, and flying. So here you can see the fossil evidence for the limbs to fins hypothesis. You can see how there was a transition from lobe-like fins of these sort of lobe-finned fishes to tetrapods. And there are more examples of these, but these are just some of the examples that show the link, okay? Or that show links between fish that had fleshy fins with bones to tetrapod animals. Okay? And here you can also see that these bones are homologous among the different animals. Okay? Amphibians were the first tetrapods to live on land. So amphibians, they're called amphibians because they live on, so the name describes both sides living because they live both on the water or in the water and on land. As adults, most of the amphibians live on land, but they go to the water to lay eggs. And then the larvae that hatch from the water will undergo metamorphosis. So they'll turn from aquatic larvae to terrestrial or semi-terrestrial adults. So in amphibians, the gas exchange occurs across their skin. Okay, so that's the reason why amphibians have to be in moist environments, okay, or near water. Living amphibians represent a monophyletic group, so they form the class Amphibia. So this includes frogs and toads, salamanders, and newts. So newts are actually just a type of salamander that are mainly aquatic. Salamanders can be either aquatic or fully terrestrial. Okay? It depends on the species. And you also have these other types of amphibians that are called caecilians. These kind of look like snakes, and these can also either be aquatic or terrestrial. The terrestrial ones are uh, the ones that feed on things like earthworms, because these animals are mainly burrowing animals. Frogs and salamanders are carnivorous, so these feed on other animals like insects, or, or depending on the frog, whatever it can fit in its mouth. So, oops. So amphibians lay their eggs in the water because these eggs don't have the protective covering uh, to to prevent them from drying out. Other animals, or like the amniotes, these animals include all tetrapods that are not amphibians, and these are named for the amniotic egg that they produce. So this is a protective covering that reduces the rate of drying. So things like turtles or crocodiles, they'll lay their eggs on land and then they'll bury them. Okay, but other animals like birds, they lay them, uh, in their nest, and because they're more watertight, that prevents them from drying out. Okay, so they're not restricted. So these types of eggs are not uh, restricted to moist environments. So the egg itself is made up of three inner membranes. There's the amnion, which contains the embryo. There's the yolk sac, and then there's the allantois. Then the egg also contains the albumin, which is the part that cushions the embryo and provides nutrients. So the membranes provide mechanical support and increases the surface area for easier gas exchange. And all these membranes are surrounded by the shell, which is made of calcium carbonate. So we have the embryo here. Okay, that's contained within the amnion. The allantois contains the waste. The yolk sac contains the nutrients that feeds the embryo. You have the chorion, which allows for the gas exchange, and the albumin that provides support. Okay? They're all contained within the shell. Mammals are a monophyletic group of amniotes that are named for the mammary glands that they have. So these are the glands that produce milk that they use to feed their young. Okay? And this process is called lactation. These are the only vertebrates that have cheek muscles and lips, because that's what the young use to suckle. And they're also endotherms. They maintain a high body temperature by oxidizing large amounts of food and generating large amounts of heat. Their body's also covered with layers of fur or hair that's made of keratin. There are three major lineages of mammals alive today. There are the monotremes, like the platypus, shown here, and also the echidnas. Okay, these are egg-laying mammals. Then there's the marsupials, like this opossum, and other marsupials like kangaroos, koalas, uh, wallabies, wombats. Marsupials are the mammals that are found in Australia. So for the most part, they're found in Australia, but animals like the opossum are found in the Americas. Then you have the placental mammals that are also known as the eutherians. So these are the mammals that produce a placenta within the uterus or oviduct during pregnancy. So these includes, all the rest of the mammals like rodents, weasels, deer, cats, dogs, all of those. Placenta is an organ that combines the maternal and embryonic tissues. So there's the rich it's rich in blood vessels, which facilitates for the flow of oxygen and nutrients from the mother to the developing embryo, and it also allows for the embryo to get rid of the waste that it produces, as well as the CO2. Okay. The embryo contributes to the placenta with the allantois and the chorion, and after the development period or gestation, the embryo emerges from the mother's body. So here you can see the mammalian placenta that nourishes the embryo. So this looks very similar to the egg that we saw with the regular amniotic egg. The main difference here is that the yolk sac it's a lot smaller because the placenta provides um, it also provides nutrients to the embryo. So there's no need for a large yolk sac, right? Because it's still connected to the mother. Okay. But the other tissue layers are still there. The amnion contains the embryo. There's the chorion, okay, the yolk sac. So there's evolutionary advantages um, of the vivipary and the placenta. The offspring are kept at a more constant temperature, so they're not susceptible to to harsh conditions like like cold environments or you know being damaged by too much heat, if left unprotected. And then also the offspring are protected because they're being carried with the mother, and it also allows the mothers not to be tied to the nest, so the mothers can go out and obtain food or whatever else that it needs. But there's also trade-offs to these uh, adaptive traits because the placenta is energetically expensive to produce, and also bearing live young can be energetically costly and you know risky in some situations because there can be complications during birth. The earliest mammals in the fossil record appeared about 195 million years ago, and mammals were widespread and ecologically diverse by 165 million years ago. So this means that mammals began to diversify when dinosaurs and other reptiles were the dominant herbivores and predators in different environments. Many of the lineages died out during the end Cretaceous mass extinction, but the lineages that survived underwent adaptive radiation. So these are the mammalian orders that are found today. And these are the ones that filled the ecological roles that were once uh, dominated by dinosaurs and ocean dwelling reptiles like ichthyosaurs. Okay, so this is a good place to stop, so we'll pause here.